Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining our Heroes webinar tonight. Our focus is on emergency medical services. We've got two great panelists tonight. I do want to start with a couple of quick housekeeping items to make sure that our webinar is most effective as well as meets all of your needs. First and foremost, if you would like to communicate with us, we want to hear from you, and you can use the chat feature at the bottom or the Q&A feature. I assure you our guest panelists tonight would like your questions or your comments, so please feel free to use that because we would really like to hear from you. The second thing I want to bring your attention to is that this is being recorded, and we will make sure that we notify participants when it's been uploaded, and you can either share it or view it again if you had questions and wanted to go back. Also, on the bottom of the scroll bar, you'll see a button that says resources. And if you click on that, there's a link that will take you to our website. And if you click on the speakers tab, you can find out more information about our two guest speakers tonight. So tonight we're here to talk about what we're dubbing the perfect storm in EMS. Full disclosure, Mike, Monte, and I meet maybe quarterly. We get together and talk about what's going right in the world, what problems we want to solve, and certainly our passion for the EMS and fire and rescue workforce. And tonight's topic really came out of one of those conversations where we realized it really was becoming the perfect storm. We'll talk later tonight about the connection between active bystandership and workforce resiliency. But what we were talking about was that, yes, we know recruitment is a challenge in this workforce, but so is retention, and that there is also a real human impact for what happens when we're losing people into the field because of preventable harms that we potentially observe every single day. So without further ado, I'd like to actually introduce our guest speakers by giving a little bit of background. Both of these gentlemen are very humble, so I'm going to take the lead in giving their background because they would just introduce themselves as Mike and Monte, but we'll give a little bit more context to that. So starting with Monte, Monte Chambers is a seasoned public safety leader with a diverse background spanning EMS and law enforcement. He is a Heroes National instructor, and he brings unique cross-disciplinary perspectives to workforce wellness, leadership, and organizational change. With more than 2 decades of experience on the front lines and in leadership roles, he's developed and implemented strategies that strengthen team trust, improve retention, and foster cultures of accountability and care across public safety sectors. And Monte is fresh off of another gig where he is helping leaders across the country understand more about crisis communications. That's a real area of interest for him as well. So Monte, welcome. Glad to have you here tonight. And we are also joined, thank you, by Mike. Mike is an EMS professional, an educator, and author. I think in the resource link, if you click on that, you can see his book, and you can learn more about the book that he published. I believe it is Supercharge Your Stress Management in the Age of COVID-19. Did I get that right, Mike?
Right.
He actually, I think you have a cool story about how you decided to write that book, but please check it out, folks, if you've got questions. And I would say that based on my read of the book, it's not just for COVID-19. It's a great stress management reminder for anybody. How about just in the age of dealing with high stress and high burnout? He talks about challenges and lessons learned from those who served in those unprecedented times. He serves as the First Watch improvement guide, where he is the organization's lead expert in improvement science, resilience, and stress management, a respected instructor and advocate for the well-being of first responders. Mike combines evidence-based insight with practical experience to illuminate the realities and the rewards of sustaining a healthy workforce culture. Does that sound like you, Mike?
Close enough. It'll work.
Close enough, right? There's somebody else there. All right. So actually, I want to dive right in because we were at, all three of us were at a conference, the Pinnacle Conference last year, when EMS One talked about some data from across the country that they did a survey of the EMS workforce. And I think we were sitting at different places in the conference and started to text a message around, wow, this is pretty powerful information. And Monte, I want to start with you around, based on both your experience as a front lines in EMS, as well as your leadership roles, and now what you're seeing in consulting and training, what do you think is driving the growth of this disconnect? That was one of the key takeaways from that EMS One survey, was a huge disconnect between EMS leaders and field providers. What's driving this?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, Abigail. What you just described there is really like two different realities of the same system. So what I would say is first, you have your field providers. They're kind of living what I would consider to be like the symptoms of a challenging system, while your EMS leaders, they're kind of living the constraints of the system. And so with your EMS providers, your EMTs and your paramedics, it's like they're in a sense of a catch-all type of a system to where now the responsibility of having to fix everything from social issues to mental health calls to the whole ideal of low manpower and individuals feeling so burdened that now a lot of agencies have not shifted or changed the size of their systems to be able to keep up with the demand of the deployment of new technologies with documentation or even the areas of compensation around it with this expanded scope of practice, I would say, that a lot of EMTs and paramedics in today's climate is being asked to burden. And so you can only imagine the other ripple effects that can actually come from that. The first one could be communication. A lot of EMTs and paramedics, they feel like communication could be one-sided. And oftentimes they may say, hey, well, the only time we hear from leadership is when we've done something wrong. And so that really leads to there's that other version of the disconnect in terms of feedback being delivered when, something dealing with the QA or QI, and it's almost like a hit job or something that I've done wrong instead of a coaching model. So there are so many other things that are associated with this as well. But if you look at it from the standpoint of the EMS leaders, they're forced with the constraints of dealing with the political side. They're forced to deal with the budgetary limitations that they have in order to still provide quality services with inside their said EMS agency. And I'll give you this, trust is always going to be the currency of leadership. Trust actually starts when people realize that they are no longer being asked to quietly endure a problem that is being publicly minimized. And so when we're looking at the overall symptoms of the system that continues to grow bigger and bigger, I think that really speaks to the larger aspect of the disconnect that we see. So what can we do to fix it? I think one immediate thing that we can do is that we need to call it what it is. Be okay with showing the data. The EMS surveys are out there. They're showing that the number one issue right now that has actually surpassed the recruitment and retention issue is actually the effects of burnout. North of 75% of individuals say, hey, burnout, that is the number one thing that is driving individuals either away from our industry or we're not attracting people to our industry. So one of the things we have to do as EMS leaders and educators, we have to say it out loud. We have to bite the bullet. And then we have to invite the field providers into the room to be able to interpret the data based upon their perspective. So whether that's we're holding sessions, we're holding listening sessions, and we are calling things out what they are. Hey, we get it. Our crews are burning out. There are multiple different other demands that we are asking EMTs and paramedics to do and to shoulder that once before were not being considered. So these are some of the other elements. I mean, there are many more, but I think those are kind of like the key points that I'm seeing right now versus in the industry.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think one of the things there's a lot of nuggets in what you just shared, getting down to just one thing I think I heard right is that sometimes just as a leader, the longer you're in leadership, the longer you get away from just doing the tasks of the job and you forget what that's like. And at the same time, the tasks of those jobs increase and become harder, more technology, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's key just to your point, recognize, right? 100%. I also really like that you called out, like, there's two perspectives here. Something we're really big on at Heroes and Active Bystandership is we don't get into the othering philosophy, right? So there's room at this discomfort table for everybody. So there's an uncomfortable perspective for the workforce, but also for leaders. You mentioned the pressures that they're under. And I do think that that's it's a clear and backed strategy. And I'm always so curious why it still continues to be difficult for people or challenging or, yeah, I would love to just unpack the why we don't see more often leaders saying, I'm seeing this data. How is this happening here in our agency? And then tell me more. And folks, I did just put that survey that we mentioned in the chat as well. Mike, I saw you taking some notes and nodding. What are your thoughts, man? Jump on in.
No, I definitely appreciate Monty's perspective on this, and he's got a lovely way of framing things that kind of invites you to explore things around the side and edges that you might not have thought about. So it's one of the many things I appreciate about my conversations with the two of you. And as I was listening to this, one of the things I was thinking of is that our EMS systems sit within a healthcare system and within society at large, and the pressures that we're dealing with and the challenges that we're dealing with are impacted and informed and in relationship with a healthcare system that is currently being led at a national level by people who are not healthcare people, who the science is being discounted and those kinds of things. I don't want to get political here, but it's a real issue that decisions are being made in a way that's not medically led or scientifically led, which is a challenge. The reimbursement in our world is a real pressure for leaders, which cascades throughout the organization to the frontline providers, and that the cost of providing EMS service is really readiness cost, right? If I'm sitting here in my townhouse in Oxnard, California, and I don't have any issues, so I'm not consuming the local EMS services while I'm sitting here. But somebody's paying for them to be able to be here if I need them, right? And to be able to be here if I need them quickly. But the way reimbursement happens, the reimbursement happens on a piecemeal basis. So, the reimbursement system from the organizations that rely on their billing in order to be able to provide their financial infrastructure is based on piecemeal work. So you get paid only when you respond and take care of and transport. Patients were still primarily paid for transport. So those are significant issues, and there's a lot of other kind of conflicts in the world. So we've got the opioid crisis and the concerns around the deaths around those. One of our customers in their city, they average 128 opioid overdoses a day.
Wow.
The biggest day I know of, they had a 248 opioid overdose day in a single day in one city, which is incredible. And at the same time, there's like healthcare expectations and performance measures around pain management. People, one of the common reasons to call 911 is because you're having chest pain, or you've fallen and broken your hip, or you've been involved in a car crash and things that involve pain. And, one of the things that we do in managing patients is manage pain. So there's this like expectation and pressure to manage pain better, but there's also this concern about opioid overdose, and a lot of our pain management involves opioids, and so there's like this conflict that we live moment by moment that people are dealing with. And we've got a young workforce that is tends to be less career focused, and tends to like exploring different jobs for a few years, so that that retention piece is challenging. And we put a lot of investment into the development of new EMTs and new paramedics to get them up to speed where they can handle cases on their own, safely and effectively and with high quality and good customer service and those kinds of things. And when I was running the system here locally in Ventura County a few years ago, I calculated what the cost of a turnover was if a paramedic left, and with paying time and a half to fill their slot, and recruiting costs and training costs until they were productive to be able to do it, it cost me $130,000 for each person that turned over. So in places where there's a turnover rate in the 10, 15, 20, some places 25%, that's millions of dollars a year that are essentially put in the paper shredder, that you get no like additional additional benefit for. So from the leadership perspective, that's a particular challenge. And meeting the needs of people who are, having a chest pain, or they've been shot, or having a sickle cell crisis, or an asthma attack, or they just, have fallen and can't get up. In that it's a complex thing to deliver from the frontline perspective, and certainly from the leadership perspective. And one other issue that pops up is the whole disparities and diversity, equity, inclusion kinds of things, which a lot of my work over the last several years has been based on, which is now kind of fallen out of favor, I guess, shall we say, from the federal perspective, and a lot of it wiped out of the federal work, and the funding is going away from it, and those kinds of things. But organizations are still care about that. So that's just some of my thoughts and notes based on the conversation so far.
Yeah, thank you so much. I did pop into the chat, folks, a question about whether or not you think your workforce, volunteer or paid, understands the reimbursement framework and how it impacts. And Chris, thanks for putting in there that you think crews have a general understanding, and there's a big focus when they do, which makes sense, right? When they have to document, that's when they learn, like, this is why this is important, because there's a dollar bill behind this documentation or lack thereof. But man, 130K, I mean, that is not chump change. And I know that was a while ago. And all I can think about is how, oh man, those dollars could have been invested back into the workforce, right? Training for the workforce, health and wellness resources, new equipment, all that stuff. And then I like the phrase, it goes into the paper shredder. I think that's helpful. One thing you talked about that I'm curious of both of your thoughts on, and if anybody attending tonight has an example too, I'd like to hear it. So you talked about how they have sometimes this, I'll use a very psychology term, a dialectic, right? So it's when it's a both and you were talking about pain management, right? So we've got this opioid epidemic, but then this expectation to manage pain. So something that I know psychologically that I like to share with folks is that we know that one tiny element that can really increase both burnout and compassion collapse. And I want to define those both because they're different, but they can overlap. And really, when they're together, they push force this workforce loss that we see. But one thing that can do both is when staff feel like they have a competing expectation and it's not named or not clear to them. So in other words, if they're being asked to do one thing on one call and then they flip to the other call and they have to do something different. And seasoned professionals might have that seasonal historical knowledge to nuance between the two of them. But if that's not being trained or identified for workforce, right, what they experience is feeling like, well, I got it right this time, but I got it wrong this time, and I don't know why, right? So when people can manage a both and, people can get that as a reality. What is frustrating and can lead to psychological impact of burnout or collapse is when they feel like it's a competing demand and no one's naming it and no one's giving them training and support around that. That is a specific area that when we have a lot of those in a workforce or a culture, we want to address it. And back to Monte's point, it's not hard to address. Name it is number one. Hey, we know we're saying two things at the same time that are competing, and then open it up. I'm curious if either of you have other examples where that might be happening in EMS.
Absolutely. Several years ago, when the federal funding went away for mental health in the United States, and the resources to be able to care for people who were having emotional and psychological crises and chronic issues. EMS is the social services and psychological services of last resort. Sure. We are the safety net of which when things fall through every other aspect of the system, they land with us and we handle them, right? And so when you've got somebody who really needs mental health support and care, and you transport them to an emergency department that's already overburdened, that doesn't really have the resources to be able to provide that care. And they're assessing people, and let's say somebody needs an inpatient bed. So, right now in the county I'm in, the closest adolescent psych bed is in San Francisco. It's 6 hours away. And so the hospital, when you bring those patients, it's like when you run the call, the police department says, "Oh, thank God the paramedics are here because now you'll take this burden off of me." And then when you show up at the emergency department is, "Oh no, here's somebody else who we don't have the resources to really care for." So the medics kind of, medic and the patient and their patient are kind of, in this kind of little bit of ping pong limbo, which I think sets up that psychological construct and experience you were describing.
I would agree. Monte, any thoughts or any ideas about other examples of where that occurs in EMS?
Yeah, I'll just say, just from newer EMTs or paramedics having innovative ideas and those ideas not making it up through the chain of command. And
Right.
so it's almost as if, a newer EMT or a paramedic has this great idea because they're the boots on the ground, they're the front lines, they're seeing things from a different perspective and or lens. And it's like the first time something is denied or there's just, utterly silence, if you will, that can be discouraging. And that can really cause that paramedic or EMT to even second guess their ability to even progress in this department and or as an EMT or paramedic somewhere else, because now it's as if they're operating in a system that was once recruited to them or appealed to them, that they had an opportunity to be able to show that true compassion. But it's like when the system starts to eat you from within, how do you better manage that when you're not even given the right systems or even structures to be able to show how to be able to navigate this new world of EMS leadership? And so I would say, back to Mike's point of that ping pong, that can only go so many times with a lot of these newer EMTs and paramedics before it can really become frustrating for them too.
Yeah. Couple of up. So if you're following along in the chat, folks, my friend Chris and I connected, and he introduced himself once as just a paramedic, to which I told him the last time that there's no such thing as just a paramedic. So that is the running joke you all see in the chat there as well. But he highlighted another example of lack of structured training, which I think falls in line with what you're saying, Monty, right? Like I get recruited in, maybe I don't get the best structured training, but then I've got a great idea about how to make things better. And I think you said something that I really want leaders to pay attention to. And then there's silence, right? I mean, we know that we still have people who are, crotchety OG leaders who are like, that's a terrible idea. I think sometimes people would prefer that response than silence, right? Silence is
Yep.
so depersonalizing. Like, what do you do? Are you supposed to follow up? Do you not follow up? Was it a bad idea? Are you thinking about it? So leaders, please pay attention. Even if you just say, hey, acknowledge, great idea. And I mean, here's a wild card, be authentic. I'm hardly keeping up with my own emails today. This isn't about you. I'll, please ping me in a month or two if I haven't gotten back to you, or, whatever it is. I think that's a great idea. Or learn how to delegate for sure. Right. And inconsistencies. I do want to just clarify those psychological constructs briefly, because I think this is really important for us to understand. So burnout can happen in any occupation. In any job, people can get burnt out, and predominantly burnout. If you're gonna point fingers, in burnout, we're looking at organizational or just volume, right? So high volume of any kind of job, but also organizational toxicity, poor leaders, inconsistencies, poor communication. That's going to burn people out. And then we have vicarious trauma, which we know the EMS workforce has every single day. Vicarious trauma, or secondary trauma, secondary stress, it's sometimes called, is simply what happens when you are exposed to the trauma of others, point blank, right? So, and that happens every single day in the work that EMS is doing. But that's different than what we often call compassion fatigue or compassion collapse. And that really is when both of those two things come together. When people are experiencing vicarious trauma and they're experiencing burnout, sometimes there's a precipitating event, but more often it happens over a period of time. And what I like to tell folks is that burnout can usually turn around pretty quickly if an organization or a leader really owns and changes their practices. People are pretty responsive to that and can do that. If it goes, of course, the longer it goes on, the longer you have to rebuild that trust. And when it comes to vicarious trauma, I could do a whole nother session, or please contact me if you're interested. There's a ton of really evidence-informed psychological treatments that are very effective, sometimes in 6 sessions or less, that can really help people experiencing traumatic stress from secondary stress. But when we get to compassion collapse, when we get both of those, there is no quick fix. Like at that point in time, folks, like we need formal interventions and time in order to mend that for human beings. And I personally would say that we have a very large percentage of our EMS workforce walking around with compassion collapse, right? Like they are in need of a lot of support, and a couple of nights of good sleep ain't gonna do it. You're not gonna cut it at all. It's like trying to take the pressure off a rice cooker and you wonder why it never cooks. So, Mike, I feel like you were about to like say something. I was like, oh no, it looks like he was gonna say something, and then I went into
No,
Professor
no, no.
Pepper
It's
mode.
good. It's good. It's good. So there's two things. One, when one of the things Monty was talking about was around recruitment, and I think that there is a like a setup, and there's been some chat in the conversation in the chat about initial training and those kinds of things. And one of the challenges is that EMS tends to use pretty exciting hero kinds of stuff in their recruitment, in their videos and their images and all those kinds of things. It's the rescuing burning babies, and that kind of imagery, where the work is much less life-saving heroic, kinds of stuff. I did an analysis with a couple of friends of 4.5 million 911 calls, and 6.9% needed any potentially life-saving clinical intervention on them at any point in time during the call. And we used a really broad definition of potentially life-saving. So, and it included things like giving a sepsis alert to the hospital, which doesn't feel very like paramedic-y or exciting, but it was on the list. So significantly more than 90% of calls don't need any of those kinds of interventions. So that work is very relational. It is hand-holding. It is providing some sense of control to an out of control situation for people. That is being kind, is being connected, is being compassionate, and the recruitment doesn't usually reflect that that's what the work is going to be. So people come in feeling like they're going to be heroes, and then experience themselves as I'm not doing heroic kinds of stuff. And one of the biases, and I'm very curious as to your thoughts on this, both Abigail and Monty, about that if you are fed and nurtured by compassion and connection, that your likelihood of burnout and compassion fatigue and compassion collapse drops dramatically. But if that doesn't feed you, and you're only fed by, you know, intubating and defibrillating and doing CPR and those kinds of things, that you're setting yourself up for disappointment and challenges. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts around that.
Yeah. Monte, I'll let you take first crack.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say to Mike's point, there should probably be a rewriting of the job description for the modern day EMT and paramedic. And even to Mike's point, there should also be an idea of a reworking of the onboarding process for most EMTs and paramedics also. It's different when you're testing to get your license, doing your clinical leads, as well as an EMT, you have to get your hours in on the medic units with ride-alongs. But I think when you're coming up on employment, that's a different type of animal of you having and holding that ultimate responsibility. So a realistic viewpoint about what the job actually entails, I think that can be extremely helpful. And then I love Mike's alliteration there. I wrote it down: compassion and connection, because I just love connected words. And I just think that is so profound. And he's 100% correct. For our workforce who are walking on eggshells emotionally, there's
Mhm.
really no true foundation of connection. Just like it's almost taboo inside of law enforcement to talk about therapy, it's kind of similar to our partners in EMS. And there's really no true anchor point that we can really bond over aside from a patient. And so those conversations need to be happening more and a lot more. And this is where I believe a lot of our seasoned paramedics and seasoned EMTs can really be helpful. This is where their skill sets of understanding how to develop true soft skills of how to communicate, not only with the patient, but with crew members. We can easily be able to fix the connection piece with a disconnected seeming generation who doesn't have that initial innate ability to say, hey, you know what? Something's off here. I need perspective here. I think I'm missing something right here. I think that is a great way to keep around your seasoned veteran employees while at the same time closing the gap or drawing that connection with a lot of your newer EMTs and paramedics who are trying to make this a wonderful career as well.
Both. This is what happens. Now you both got me thinking. I'm writing stuff down because I don't want to forget it. This is what happens. All right. First, thanks, John. Just reading in the chat there, the data resonates. A small town department, 6.9 is far and few between, but we focus much more on patient satisfaction. Try to focus on our new providers, soft skills. Absolutely. And he said, which is 100% what Monte said. So he's doubling down on that for sure. And one of the first things I wanted to share is that I think you both gentlemen know, but my father is retired volunteer firefighter. And I grew up in what was a rural area, is now suburban sprawl. And I think about that essentially the connection that existed in the small town was around the bar that was in the firehouse, right? Like you finished your call and there was a bar right there, right? That was how people connected, if they connected, right, in that sense. And there were cool, I mean, I can remember doing Christmas carols in the fire truck, right? And the county EMS would come in, but that was kind of a for show connection, right? There's not real conversations. Nobody there is talking about the baby that died on the call a week ago and it's still wrecking the entire department, right? Nobody's talking about that in these settings. And so there's this almost pretend sense of connection because you're a small town and a small community that's not on the real level that I would want to say as a psychologist. And I think it's really interesting to see that there is a parallel to that in a big city. I was talking to an EMS chief this morning, very large suburban, right outside of a huge metropolitan city. I mean, they're back to back calls all day long. The number one thing she's looking for is for her workforce to feel more connected to their own peer support team. The number one problem she's seeing, she's got resources, but people aren't using them, right? And they don't feel connected to their own peer support team. So I think that's key to call that out. I did also want to answer your question, Mike, around that. It's interesting because I thought you were going to go the other way with that. You said, that essentially if you're driven by empathy and connection and care, that you'll last longer in the line of EMS versus if you're driven by the life-saving work of intubating and rescuing, shorter. And I can totally see that for EMS. It's interesting because in the counseling and the doctoral programs where I'm a faculty and I do clinical supervision, it's often the other way around. If I have 2B therapists who need a lot of external validation in the form of who need to form a lot of external validation, or B, if they're highly driven by empathy, it's a high rate of burnout because they're constantly having to be empathetic. And so if that is something that's supernatural to them, it sometimes can drive them to overuse the empathy skill. And then they burn out in a different way, right? Like they burn out in
interesting.
Yeah, like they overuse, like they're naturally good at the job because they have that empathetic and they like connection, but then they overuse it and it depletes them. I mean, they feel depleted and exhausted in that sense, right? And oftentimes they don't have a word for it, right? They just are starting to feel numb. You can see it in compliance issues, right? Because they start to make mistakes, cut corners, things like that. And what we often say is you got to have a highly conscientious side where you got to be able to understand that sometimes there's boring parts of our work, paperwork, things like that. It's so interesting you said that. But yet I can also see if I have somebody coming in who wants to be a counselor or a psychologist and they just want to rescue everybody, that's a big red flag for me, right? Because we don't rescue people in therapy either, right? We create a space for people to rescue themselves. So I wonder if that's the correlate with the people who just want to intubate and save the world, right? When you have that, I want to be the hero rescuer, and instead you're going into the nursing home for the fifth time this month to transport somebody from one bed to another bed, that doesn't feel like you've met that heroic desire.
It's interesting as you're talking, and when I think back on my time in the field, and when I think back, and I got a lot of good memories. I had a blast working as a street paramedic. Um, those magical connections with patients are what I remember. I
Mm.
have a tragic case, but I was sitting on Colfax. I was a Denver paramedic, sitting on Colfax Avenue. A bunch of kids on the across the street in front of the dirty bookstore, and somebody was riding by on his bicycle. He got punched by somebody who was on the sidewalk and knocked off his bike, and his bike kind of dumped into the street. And I saw after he fell, he wasn't getting up, and I was attending him to my partner. Let's light it up. So we just turned on the red lights and basically pulled across the street to block traffic. And I go out to check because it didn't look like that bad a fall, so it didn't look like he should be hurt very bad. And I went up to him, and he had a stab wound in the left side of his chest. The guy who punched him had a knife in his hand that I hadn't seen. Right.
Ah.
So it's like, this is a stabbing. Let's pick up our pacer a little bit, get him loaded, and we're off to Denver General. And he was 14 years old, and I started one IV, and I was getting ready to put the infusion set into the second IV bag, to start the second IV, and I made eye contact with him in between the infusion set and the bag. And after you've done this for a while, you'll recognize the look in somebody's eye where they're going to die. And I could tell that he knew he was going to die. And that none of the stuff, and he was awake and fully talking, but I knew that none of the stuff that we were going to do was going to save him. And so I paused at that moment, and I said, is there anybody you want me to get a message to? And he said, my parents have been dead for a couple of years. I've been living on the street. There's really nobody, but thank you for asking. And then he put his hand on my leg to comfort me and said, it's going to be okay, right? And just about then we hit the driveway to Denver General. I quickly spiked the second IV, and he cardiac arrested and died, about 15 minutes later. And that little moment of connection, without it, he would have died alone, right? And so, whether it was somebody with a broken hip, or they were just lonely, or whatever the reason for the 911 call, I always kind of sought out to have that moment of human connection with them, because it lit them up, it eased their pain, it had them feel seen, and I got constant feedback that they really felt cared for, and I felt like I was really living my purpose and doing my job in that process.
Mm-hmm.
And I never experienced a single moment of burnout or compassion fatigue in the entire time. I've been in this industry 52 years, and I've managed to avoid it. And my theory is that this is part of what's allowed me to really enjoy this career the whole time I've had it.
Well, and I think lucky for the next generation that you're bringing that gift forward to share. And I think you have some other tips that I think weren't just happenstance for why you were very protected to that I would love to get back to and share. But I really want to reflect. Alice put a beautiful comment in the chat that I think really resonates. I know I was moved. I was absolutely getting goosebumps by your story. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, Alice, I love what you stated there, which is good for you, Mike, to pause in that moment of recognition. You recognize the sacredness of the moment. And it's truly, right? I mean, there's, in this work, you can't save everybody, but that people not dying alone is a sacred moment for sure. I also want to take a moment. We had some other activity in the chat that I want to loop back to because I think there's value in hearing from everybody. Alice, just moving on, you were talking about the connection to peer support teams seems to be deeply related to pre-existing legitimate relationships. I couldn't agree more. That definitely is very true. I know in the work that we do in helping peer support teams, some of the key elements that I would recommend, and certainly happy to connect with people offline. But one thing that's often very when I experience this recommendation is unpopular, I'm immediately concerned about both burnout and compassion fatigue, as well as I think the lack of trust that you're talking about, which is that I highly recommend that peer support teams have a mandatory rotate out every 2 years. So every 2 years in the peer support team, you got to rotate out for at least a year. And when I get immediate resistance for that, I often ask. Now, sometimes there's legitimacy in just capacity, right? That is fair, and let's have conversations about that. But oftentimes that resistance is oftentimes people, Monte and I talk about this a lot, about how people wear that kind of compassion fatigue like a badge of honor, right? And they're just going to put their head down and go, 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 and just keep going through the pain, so to speak. And that's not a healthy culture. But the other one is sometimes there's toxicity, right? And so in a large healthcare organization I worked for, we had a mandatory policy that made people after about 2 years take 1 week off. Sure, it was for their self-care, but it's also because we could find compliance issues when people were gone, right? And so the same applies here. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, Alice. That's why training is so important when it comes to high quality training and making sure you have a clinical backup for your peer support teams. And Chris, you asked a question in the chat that I want to make sure I understand, and then I want to take it back to Monte and then see if Mike has anything else to ask. So Chris, your question is, where do you feel that message should start? And I'm curious, Chris, I either feel free to, if you want to, I'm happy to bring you off mute if you'd like to just ask the question yourself, or if you would like to type chat, please let me know. But I think at that time we were talking about that recruitment shift, right? And about how what is the job really, and what does it mean, and how do you communicate that in a workforce training? So I want to just pause and make sure, Chris, that I've got that question correct before I pitch it to both of them. Oh, okay. As an educator, should it start with initial certification? Gotcha. Okay, Mike is following you there for sure. Monte, do you have any initial thoughts, or do you want to pitch it to Mike?
Yeah, let's let Mike kick us off, and then I'll tee off after them.
All right.
There's no doubt that our foundational education needs to line up with the realities of the work and the wellness, longevity, self-care strategies for doing this. And I've been around a number of organizations that have done this well. One of my favorites, Tom Dick, who used to write the Tricks of the Trade column in the original Gems magazine. He's like a prolific author. When he got started in an education role, one of the things he realized is that a lot of the stresses for frontline EMS providers were personal financial stresses. They'd go out and buy a big pickup truck and have a big payment and all this kind of stuff, and have to work overtime shifts in order to make their truck payments and all this kind of stuff. So as part of his initial education, he taught people how to open a checking account and how to use credit cards and how credit worked, and the basics of managing your finances so that it wasn't a stress point in your life, and you could do it within the salary that you made there. And a lot of people come to us without those kinds of basic life skills, and kind of like recognizing that, and other self-care strategies around sleep and nutrition and exercise and all those kind of basic things, I think should be a foundational part of our core education and our onboarding education, and the way we educate and the way we lead.
Thanks, Mike. I agree. Yeah. Monte, what are your thoughts?
No, I agree with them. One thing I would propose is that even for onboarding new EMS providers, there should be enough diverse perspectives from different disciplines to come speak about the things that they're professional about. Regarding the finance issue, there should be somebody who comes and speak about that very, very fluently in a language to where people can understand. regarding with mental health. I know, so you put in the chat, adulting. It's almost like there should be a crash course for like home economics for EMS professionals. Because most people, when they're saying that they're tired and stressed, what they're really experiencing, well, I just have financial strain because I haven't developed a system or I haven't developed the right skill set on how to overcome this particular hurdle, whether that is with a personal relationship or dealing with finances or even just how to overall manage. Because what usually happens is that most people come to this career, aside from Mike, because he's an anomaly, in my opinion. Most
I
people
agree.
come to this career and they are trying to run a very succinct sprint, but it's actually a marathon with a lot of walking with an umbrella in the rain. And unfortunately, the reason I said it that way
I
is
love
because
this.
So
the reason
Monte.
I'm saying is because the patience that it's required to
Yeah.
be able to see long term enough while you're going to the repeat individual, while you're going to that frequent flyer call, can you still maintain the same professional decorum while you're dealing with that fire captain or that particular supervisor whom you just don't like or who's very toxic in the organization? Do you have enough staying power to be able to see it through? And so the whole idea of teaching endurance, that should be really stressed a whole lot inside of the onboarding process. So this whole idea of home economics for EMS professionals, we probably need to consider developing some type of curriculum around that.
First of all, can people all just for imagine moment, if Mike and Monty and I get together and put together a new training that is home economics for EMS, like we're ready. Just call us up. We're ready to come and start doing this. I got some great ideas already. I tell you what.
It will,
Look at Mike.
it will include flossing and alarm clocks. How do you use an alarm clock to get places on time? And I mean, those are basic life skills. I love it.
They are. Yeah. And when it's snowing outside and I'm already at the office, please don't call me and ask me if we need to come to work today. That would be added to my list. Oh, Chris, absolutely showering. Yep, Chris has got you there. I wonder if Chris and Yakula have got two. Welcome, Yakula. Glad to have you on. Thanks for joining us. And both of you, I think, are asking a similar question that I'd love to kind of tee up together and again take to our presenters. I, of course, have some thoughts. But Chris is talking about how that, there's still an over glorification of the job, right? Paints us as a superhero. We're talking about self-care, but I mean, Chris, one of my pet peeves when I look at trainings for public safety in general is when two things. Number one, when we're talking about self-care, but we're not giving people tools and giving them the resources on what to do with that. And then the second thing that is concerning to me is when we talk about it and maybe we actually give them the tools, but we send a silent and powerful message culturally that we don't do that here. Right. So it's in the training. I could go in a curriculum and I could find it and people are training on it and they might even be handing out peer support and resources and all these things. But anybody who's been at that agency for more than 5 years, none of them have used those services. They probably wouldn't know how to directly connect their own workforce if they had to. And they are willingly or unwillingly, because I think a lot of leaders unintentionally are saying it, they believe it, they want their workforce to take care of themselves, but they're not taking care of their own selves. And then they wonder why there's this, again, that's that silent, I'm saying this thing, but my walk is not matching that. So those are two things that I would just, I think, agree with you on there, Chris. And then Yakula, I think you're asking like the what do we do about it side of that question, right? Like other than just saying peer support. Well, let me just pause. I have some thoughts, but Monty, what are your thoughts about some quick tips? I'm mindful of time. So some quick tips, particularly in onboarding about how to address this kind of big umbrella of resiliency and self-care.
Yeah, I think to your point, one of the first tips I always advise any instructor or facilitator is we have to model a message. That is so clean in my opinion because it allows you to be at peace while you're communicating a hard truth. And one of the challenges that we see oftentimes is that we try to speak too much about things without practicing it privately. And you're never going to outpace your public achievements if your private achievements are not up to par as well. And so there has to be an order of operations first to where you're modeling messaging so that your ideas can not only be received the right way, but you're the one that's modeling it in such a way that you have this aura or this energy about you that you naturally begin to attract people around you. And they're like, you know what? You're different for a good reason, and I can see it all on you. That becomes contagious. And if you actually have that in you, like people are going to naturally just flock to you and your ideas are going to be received well.
But there's a reason I love hanging out with the two of you, and you just articulated it perfectly.
He did, right? And it
You
is true.
did.
There is psychological science, folks, to say that this type of it's our mirror neurons. We love to mirror our social settings around us, and so when we are truly, and what I think is so key to what Monte just stated there is that you can't fake it. Like the neurons in our brain, they are picking up when you're saying self-care is important, but you look, sound, and act like you're not. The microneurons are confused, but they're darn sure that that's not health and wellness. Like they know what it's not, right?
Well, and EMS providers are professional BS detectors,
Yes.
right? I mean, they get lied to for a living. I only had 2 beers. No, there's no chance I'm pregnant. I mean, you think about all the things that you hear constantly from your patients that are just flat out lies, and you learn how to sniff those out, and you'll sniff those out in your leaders and your partners and your teachers just as quickly.
So well stated. But yet when you truly are from the outside in and inside out taking care of yourself, that emulates, right? And I certainly agree. That's why I like hanging out with both of you too, for sure. And I want to leave with one thing, maybe two things. So I would happily talk more, Yakima, than anybody else about kind of what people can do in approaching their onboarding training curriculum to really make it realistic. But here's the real truth, and I know that you already know this, Yakima, but the bottom line is that agencies have to be committed to be ready to make changes, right? You can train all you want, but culturally, how are we going to shift this? And then from a policy and procedure, how are we going to make sure those resources are truly available as needed? But I want to comment that number one, not everybody's self-care has to look like bubble baths and pedicures, right? That we have a bias, I know, right? We have a bias in our society around what self-care looks like. And I, especially in a public safety community sector, we gotta get around judging what other people's self-care is. But we still, I think to Monty's point, we don't have to hide it, right? So I know that for me, a huge form of self-care for me is exercise. That is a huge form of self-care for me. But this is leading me to my final point, is that the best form of self-care is actually self-discipline. So self-care is the immediate thing that we do to feel good in the moment, right? Like I feel good when I'm working out, those endorphins kick me. I feel great about that. But self-discipline is me making sure that I get up at 5:30 in the morning and I do the dang thing, even when I don't feel like doing it, because the sense of accomplishment that I feel for the rest of the day lasted way beyond the self-care in the moment. And so when we create, so one of the things I'll add to our home ec for EMS related to self-care is that we can, if you don't like the word self-care, you could throw it out the window. I'd rather people talk about self-discipline, and including in that self-discipline, how will you care for your physical, your mental health, your spiritual health, and your emotional health? How will you have self-discipline around caring for that? And to loop it back to our primary point, I think leaders, how do we build a training, but how do you build a community that supports that? Because especially if you got people new into the workforce, that might be very new to them. And, or maybe they're really good in the firefighter culture, really good at tending to that physical health demand, but maybe not so good over here on that. So how do you balance it out? We,
I'll just say, Abigail, I gotta say, self discipline is the ultimate form of self respect.
Yes, I agree. And self-care, I would agree with you. Yes, it starts with that
Yes.
for sure. Well stated. So you can see why we like to hang out together. And this is what always happens when we do. We get talking, we get passionate, and I'm like, oh my goodness, an hour is just about up. And so we want to respect your all time. And thank you so much for attending. We do have time for a couple of other questions or comments. So I'm going to just take a look at our Q&A. But yes, Alice beautifully stated that academies can be good at developing discipline, but if it's imposed and not self-initiated, I think I'm with you there. And, that's a tough balance because you do need to impose some structure to help people get going. But then how do you also, what you don't want to have is a failure to launch, right? Then they leave the academy and all of that structure goes down, right? Things like that. So that is a really good observation as well. Want to just make sure that there's no other questions for our presenters, because if not, yes, there you go. I like it. You're going to be quoted tomorrow morning in the academy. Monte, looks like self-care is the ultimate self-respect. Self-discipline equals self-respect for sure. And I think having people start with one habit that if you did this on a regular basis, you would feel better and you would be better, and get that one accomplished and then start to add it. Oftentimes people say, well, I'm going to start hydrating and exercising and eating healthy, and I'm going to volunteer 10 hours a week, and they try to do too much and they wonder. Oh, absolutely, Alice, mother of a medic. Thanks you. Fantastic. All right. I want to hear from both of you, 30 seconds or less. What is one of your self-discipline, self-care strategies that you maybe it doesn't seem really obvious, maybe it is significant, but what's something that's been important to you for both of you to be where you're at? Monte, Mike
Mike?
is handing it over to
Oh,
you first.
oh, okay. One thing I'm very intentional about every day is practicing and fostering some sense of gratitude for where I am right now in the moment. Oftentimes, just like everybody else who's on this webinar, I can get very busy. I can get in my head. I can go down the to-do list, the checklist, etc. And oftentimes, I don't take enough time to pause and actually be grateful for where I actually am. And that allows me to do like a reset. It allows me to do a reset. It allows me also to reframe where I am. So for those individuals who are part of this webinar, take some time out to practice some sense of gratitude, because it has been so very helpful for me in my journey. And I want to encourage you guys to do the same thing.
Beautiful. Mike?
Probably a similar practice. I learned to meditate when I was 14, and I've meditated every day since then. And it doesn't have to be formal meditation. It can be a yoga practice. It can be a gratitude practice. It can be just spending 30 seconds noticing the trees and the sunshine on a daily basis. But something that grounds you and connects you with the bigger, more important things in the world.
I like that. Well, and folks, I'll leave you with one last tip. Of course, very psychologist informed, but even low levels of hydration and very low levels of blood sugar can mirror a fight, flight, or freeze response. And it can have us feeling really escalated and stressed, and then making poor decisions that perpetuate a toxic cycle in our thinking and our decision making. So my recommendation is start your day with a room temperature glass of water, and make sure that you are staying hydrated consistently throughout the day, because it is amazing how that impacts your brain cells and your ability to perceive and respond to stress. And if you're feeling hyped up, anxious, we could use the Aerosmith's definition of fine. If you're feeling all of those things, I would check in with your body first and just say, is it possible you might need to have a glass of water and a power bar, and that would just give you that moment to reset. So take care of your physical body, and it does a decent job of taking care of your mental health. Thank you all so much again. You can again learn more. We'll send out notice when this gets posted up to our channels. And if you have any questions for our presenters, feel free. They are both on LinkedIn. You can find them that way, as well as I hope you'll learn more about them in the resources tab. The Heroes link is also in our resources tab. We would love to hear from you. And if you have other topics that you would like to hear about in our webinars, please let us know. We want to make sure that this is valuable to you and all of our members. Have a healthy and safe evening, and thank you all again for joining in.
Thanks for including me.
Yes, thank you both for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Had
Monte.
fun.